Well, as the government keeps telling us, the country's broke. David Cameron says he'd like to cut taxes, but he can't afford to do so right now. We are, as the Chancellor keeps telling us all, in this together. That's not quite how it looks when you hear the new tax arrangements for large companies with significant operations abroad. The government says it's going to stop taxing the profits made by the foreign branches of multinationals which are resident in the UK. Is it waving the white flag of surrender at tax havens or making the UK more tax competitive? Matt Prodger has more.
Britain's tax system is a gamble for global business, says the government. Complicated, out of sync with an age when multinationals can shop around the globe for the lowest tax rate. The Treasury says it wants to deliver a simpler tax system and ensure that corporation tax continues to place a low compliance burden on business. It says new rules must minimise the impact on commercial decisions and not interfere with the efficient management of overseas operations. So here's how it works. Let's imagine that I am a British multinational who has amassed a profit of £100 million in a low tax haven. Now, under the current rules, I have to pay the local tax rate there. Let's assume it's a generous 5%. So I give the authorities there £5 million of my profit. Now, the British taxman says that because the tax rate in the UK is 28%, I have to pay the difference to the British authorities. So that's £23 million to the British taxman. Now, under the new proposals, I'll only have to pay that lower tax rate, the 5%, to the low tax haven. And this I get to keep, and the British taxman gets nothing. Unsurprisingly, it's raised a few eyebrows.
The government are either misleading us on this one, or they've fallen completely for the propaganda put out by multinationals who are trying to get their tax rates reduced. If you make the changes that the government's proposing now, you don't lower the tax bill on the profits they make in Britain. You allow them to escape tax on profits they park in tax havens. All you do is encourage tax avoidance.
The Treasury says the proposals will mean it loses only £100 million each year in tax revenue. But the UK gains a competitive edge in attracting and keeping multinationals here. Last month, the Chancellor told businessmen in Davos the goal was to create the most competitive tax regime of any Western economy. But even fans of the policy admit it's a gamble.
There is a risk here that clearly we give up a little bit of money from multinationals. That said, it's clearly a calculated risk that this will encourage the multinationals to stay here, to invest more here, or of course, let's not forget the companies that haven't come here in recent years to tempt them into the UK.
The government says it's consulted widely. But tax campaigners are furious that the Treasury working groups who drew up the legislation were composed entirely of companies covered by it, among them multinationals that have been the target of high street protests. But tax accountants stand by the result.
The changes to branch taxation are really incremental, and their modernisation bringing us into line with what happens in many other European countries for a start, of just saying we'll concentrate fundamentally on taxing what happens in the UK.
How much safer would everybody's savings be if the whole world finally came together to outlaw shadow banking systems and outlaw offshore tax havens?
Even as Gordon Brown got a standing ovation from Congress 2 years ago, his own government was drawing up the current proposals now being implemented by the coalition. Back home, there is cross-party support.
This comes just a couple of years after Gordon Brown and George Osborne supported him in condemning the use of tax havens. G20 agreed that they would put an end to tax havens. The UK government is now introducing the single biggest incentive ever for multinational companies to put billions of pounds into tax havens.
The government has made a choice to cut taxes to promote growth and say goodbye to a share of the revenue. But it's a gamble, and there's a lot at stake.
Well, we're joined now in the studio by Richard Murphy, a founder of the Tax Justice Network and an opponent of the proposals. We're joined from New York by the global editor-at-large of Reuters, Chrystia Freeland. Richard Murphy, OK, you don't like it. It's a fact of life. Get used to it.
No, it's not a fact of life. This is a choice. It's a very significant choice by this government to help major corporations move profits to tax havens. They could, for example, cooperate with Europe to oppose that, but we don't. And as a result, this is a political choice to move in one particular direction. It's not a fact of life.
Chrystia Freeland, do you understand why so many people are so steamed up about this?
Of course I do. I mean, especially in the UK, you know, the British government is pursuing a really radical austerity program, certainly when viewed from the United States, which faces a pretty tough budgetary situation but isn't cutting nearly so harshly. And in that kind of environment, of course, it seems ridiculous to be giving big companies that have a lot of money a tax break. Having said that, I think that this is the wrong target. It really isn't very much money. And right now already, if you register your offshore activity or as a subsidiary, this is the kind of tax treatment you get. So I'm not sure that this is the right thing to be aiming at. I think what you need to aim at actually is consumption and personal income tax, because you want businesses to grow.
Right, let's pursue this one, though. The argument, first off, is this isn't a significant amount of money, Richard Murphy.
Look, I've sat on Treasury committees and consultations, and £100 million is, frankly, a guess. And a very poor guess, in my opinion, because I'm absolutely certain it is not taking into account the behavioural response of these companies. As Richard Brooks said in that interview, companies will be given the absolute golden opportunity to move money offshore, and they'll take it. They're being told by the government, we're going to design a system that will give you a tax rate of less than 10%. Of course they're going to take opportunity.
The key thing here is what the belief is in government, the effect of this will be. Now, Chrystia Freeland, it seems to many of us that what's happening here is that big multinational corporations are simply blackmailing national governments.
You know what, Jeremy? I think that that's true. The problem is it's pretty hard. It's just hard for national governments to fight that, right? Because there are lots of jurisdictions where taxes are lower than they are in the UK or in the US. And so what do? You want to have business residing, you want to have business activity in your country. They can move to Hong Kong.
Yeah, OK, so how do you deal with that, Richard Murphy?
But the reality is they won't move to Hong Kong from the UK. Look,
well,
the one company that
you're
would have
wrong.
Done, but the one company that would have done was HSBC, and it's just decided to stay here in the UK.
They reassess this about every 2 or 3 years,
Maybe, but they've decided to stay here. Our main competitors are, of course, in Europe, because actually the world is not completely global yet, it's regional. Europe is trying to put in place a common consolidated tax base for corporations. The UK is opposing it. Why are we choosing to oppose something which would actually protect our tax base and instead putting in place a situation where we can guarantee we'll have smaller profits subject to tax in the UK, subject to a lower tax rate, because that's what the government's promised, which guarantees less tax from corporations? If you ask what government is thinking, they're thinking we want less money from government when everybody else is paying more. We're not in it altogether.
Chrystia Freeland, when you look at this and you look at all these great, well-meaning, highfalutin international organisations, the obvious solution to this is some sort of, at least, well, I suppose global agreement's what you want, isn't it? Is there any chance of that?
A global tax code. I think we need a global government, Jeremy. I mean, yes, I think that this is the huge problem, right? Taxes and governments operate nationally and companies operate internationally. And you can guess who wins in that kind of a system. But I think it's pretty tough and actually dangerous for countries to try to fight that current alone.
Well, is there any danger of the G20 getting together and trying to sort something out on this?
That would be terrific. The problem is that, they got together, very effectively, I think, in the immediate wake of the financial crisis. That unity seems to be dissipating.
We were in the extraordinary legacy here of the League of Nations. There's not much that the League of Nations did that we still actually suffer from. But this is the choice they made. In the 1930s, they had to decide, did they cooperate and actually work globally to solve this tax problem, or did they actually decide that taxes were paid nationally? And at the time, of course, corporations were hardly global. The point is they made the wrong choice then, and we suffer the consequence now. The OECD has maintained this fiction that we will tax nationally when corporations are global since that time. The time has come to change the rules, to say this is a global world, to create a level playing field, because right now, big business is getting all the benefit here. Small business is going to be losing out in the UK. We're losing competitive advantage, not gaining it.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Now, 2 regimes down. How many more to go?